Hi, my name is Supriya Sharma. I am a partner at CICO. I head the research function here. Today, I am going to throw some numbers at you. 500 incubators, roughly about 30 government led schemes supporting incubators in India. To the best of our knowledge, these are some of the highest numbers across the world. What makes it complex is these most of these 500 incubators are not for profit entities, but not for being not for profit does not mean that there is no need for funds, that there is no need for money. What adds another layer of complexity is these not-for-profit incubators are focused on catalyzing and scaling up for-profit entities, which are really the startups. And this is often a challenge, a conundrum that most incubator managers grapple with, especially in their early stages. Our conversation today with my colleague Chintan Bakshi, who leads our work on incubation in the country, is going to be focused on fundraising for incubators. Chintan, can I bring you in now?
Thanks, Supriya. Hi, everyone. Quick introduction. My name is Chintan Bakshi, and I lead the incubation vertical at CICO. And we focus on supporting startups in the tier 2, tier 3 cities. We have geographical presence in 4 states: Gujarat, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Assam. And we also do programs in other regions of the country.
Welcome, Chintan. I'm going to keep this sharp because I know this is a sore point for a lot of incubator managers. Let us try and share actionables that could be quickly taken by these managers so that they're able to access and manage funds more, I think, build financial health, so to say. I have three questions. First, of course, is what could be some of the most promising or dependable sources of funding that an incubator can seek?
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. So I think a very relevant and sort of, I think, question that everybody, all incubator managers would be seeking answers to. So again, I think it will be good to look at the incubator across 3 phases because the funding sources available and the nature of kind of funds that you access in each of these phases would tend to differ. So the first phase, which is really the startup phase, when an incubator is starting up, they probably haven't, the incubator hasn't worked with a lot of startups. Maybe the incubator has supported some students or some existing beneficiaries here and there. That's really the bootstrap phase of an incubator. And, a lot of incubators I've seen essentially depend on the host institution in this phase. It will be difficult at that phase to get large institutional funding, and it's not advisable also because that's the stage where the incubator is trying to find its feet, figuring out who their beneficiary segment are, what kind of domains they need to focus on, what sort of function within the incubation innovation value chain they need to focus on. So I would say the first phase, the incubator should kind of manage with internal funds generated with the support of the host institution till the time they have some clarity on what they want to do. Once they have done that, I think a host of schemes and funding sources become available. There are, of course, a lot of central government schemes, and you talked about there being more than 30 government kind of schemes, which may also include the state government. So that's the time they should start approaching the bigger funding. It could be Department of Science and Technology, it could be, let's say, the Atal Innovation Mission, it could be MSME and various other government organizations which provide funding at that point of time. And a lot of these, when an incubator starts applying to them, would look at some sort of a background in terms of what you have done, what's the kind of students, entrepreneurs you have supported. So your first phase, which is really the bootstrapping phase, will come in handy. And the probability of your getting funding obviously improves. So that's the second phase where you are using these funds to validate and sort of consolidate your business model. The good thing about a lot of these schemes are that they will not they will of course look for some outcomes, but they will be still broad, general kind of an outcomes. How many startups got funded and things like that. They would also want you to focus on some specific areas, but in general, this funding comes with lesser kind of strains. The third phase, which is really the growth phase, where you have, once you have established some sort of a business model, this is my beneficiary segment. I think that's the time when even a lot of these government schemes would like you to become slightly more self-sufficient and not be dependent on the government for forever. So in the third phase, I think the incubator can start approaching CSRs, corporates, maybe a few multilateral organizations, etc., and also start looking at the same time, generating revenues through, let's say, startup funding and exits and all that. So that's the phase where I think the business model of the incubator needs to be fairly sharp. You need to be able to, have the team which can speak to corporates, CSRs, etc. And you also need to have an investment team which can start monetizing investments through exits, etc. So broadly, I think these would be the three phases and the various sources available across these three phases.
Wonderful, Chintan. Good ground for me to place my next question. And this is going to be an uncomfortable one because I know you'd asked this question in several forums. How do novice incubators, and typically those in tier 2, tier 3 regions, how do they raise funding with, these are essentially entities with perhaps a shorter history, may have not built a national reputation for themselves. How can they access funding?
Yeah, I think a very, very relevant question. As you mentioned, I get asked a lot that, we are an educational institution in a tier 2, tier 3 city. We are not a big name in that sense. So how do we get funds? So I think, as I mentioned, in any case, the first phase where you have to kind of validate your business model, you need to be able to generate funds internally. And in the first phase, it's not a big team that you have. You're not using up a lot of funds. You're just making sure that there is an interesting beneficiary segment and an interesting approach that you are kind of targeting. That's very important because and there are multiple examples that we have seen. Without taking names, there's an incubator which is in a tier 2 city which has decided to focus on manufacturing, and they did a few programs in the first 1 or 2 years, and on the basis of that they were able to then develop programs and go for larger funding. So what I'm really trying to say is that the strategy and the focus that you are able to develop and the business model that you are able to develop in the first 1 or 2 years essentially determines your ability to raise funds in the second and the third phase. Having a reputed sort of an institution to back you may help you to some extent, but it's not going to take you through too much as long as that clarity is not there. Within the CICO kind of family, we know about Startup Oasis. It started in Jaipur, and we decided to focus on crafts because Jaipur is a city which is kind of has crafts as a strength, and therefore you will be able to build programs and raise funding around it in the later stages. So having a clear strategy, I think a clear focus in terms of the beneficiary segment or in terms of the domain, and then being able to validate something. With that, if an incubator, even if it doesn't have too much of a reputed institution to back it, if they go to the relevant sources of funding, it could be government, CSRs, etc. I think there are many examples to show that that's how success kind of comes in. I think another quick point I would like to add specifically for tier 2, tier 3 cities is that a lot of and this is really for maybe the second and the third phase, a lot of the CSRs would want to do local area development in these regions. Right? And a lot of these CSRs will have manufacturing facilities or their units in these tier 2, tier 3 cities rather than the metros. So that's another opportunity which can be tackled, but there a certain amount of evangelization would need to be done with the local CSR teams because they may be doing conventional kind of projects and may not have worked with an incubator for supporting startups. So that's also another strategy which could be adopted.
Thank you, Chintan. Thank you for answering that uncomfortable question with, so lucidly. My third and final question to you would be, and I'm tying it back to the first question and what you shared about different sources of funding. What should the pitch, the fundraising pitch of an incubator include, especially keeping in mind that there could be these variety of constituents that they could be pitching to?
Yeah, so I think again, very very relevant because while we tell startups all the time to have a very clear focus on a particular customer segment, pain point, what we are solving, but I've seen a lot of incubators not follow it when it comes to them raising funding. Uh, it's definitely the kind of funding that a startup raises is commercial funding. The kind of funding that we may be raising, at least in the initial phases, would be grants, etc. But the need for having a clear focus and having a very tight pitch is still there. So my first point really is in terms of the pitch to have clarity of the customer segment, which is the startup in this case. What's the gap that you're trying to fulfill? As you rightly mentioned, what's the strength that you bring to the table? It could be the fact that you are located in a city which is very rich in manufacturing. So there's an ecosystem there. So if a new startup is to come, there's an advantage for them to be based in that city, and you as incubator are able to capitalize and monetize that. So I think that's really very very important. Similarly, in the case of startups, the team is very important, and we would be talking about it in a different episode altogether, separately. So the team which is managing the incubation center needs to be entrepreneurial. I've seen incubation centers where it tends to be slightly more focused on people with academic that kind of a background. So you need to make sure that there are some people in your team which are entrepreneurial, and really the team really makes a big difference in terms of your ability to kind of implement stuff. And finally, you need to also have some success factors, and it doesn't take a lot. Even in the first phase where you are bootstrapped as an incubator, you may not have funding, therefore you may not be able to do large programs. But there's nothing which prevents you from supporting 3 or 4 or 5 startups individually and validate some of your assumptions in terms of they being able to achieve certain outcomes through your support. I've seen a lot of successful incubators do that initially. And then build programs around it, right? So, and that gives the confidence to the funder too, that if they have validated or if they have shown a couple of startups which have been able to achieve a certain objective, certain orbit change or outcome through their support, the same thing can be scaled up to the means of a program or a national level program where they can support 10, 15, 20 startups. So taking that prototype and validation mindset is also very important.
Great. This is really helpful, Chintan, and I'm going to. I made a note of at least 4 things that really stood out for me. One, of course, you told us that there are different phases that incubator goes through, and their sources of funding, of course, vary across these stages. The pitch made to these constituents should ideally also vary because the pitch needs to be tied closely with what each of these constituents, what is their strategic plan. I also heard you emphasize the need for incubators to recognize what are their unique strengths, because that's really where the entire reputation building validation could come from. And around on the same theme of validation, you also told us that validation just doesn't come from doing things at scale. An incubator must also think about doing small tests, small pilots, and that itself is validation to pitch for a larger program. And finally, I heard you emphasize and maybe underscore in many places for incubator managers to think about to approach fundraising more strategically and not and typically what we also see in many incubators, and we've also been guilty of doing that in the past, is scrambling for funds instead of scrambling for fundraising. Think about it more strategically, plan your operations around it, and therefore be more in control of what you are going after. This is very very helpful, Chintan. And for those that are listening in today, we also have a playbook that is recently published, playbook for incubator managers. A lot of these nuggets have been transformed into DIY tools, into lists that incubator managers could refer to so as to be able to handle and address their fundraising needs better. This was a wonderful chat, Chintan. I'm sure we will continue doing more of these. Thank you. Thank you for today.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.